Good morning, everyone, and welcome Tom Christopher, founder and CEO of the Christopher Group. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure to speak with you again.
Before we get started, any exciting news?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we'd like to start all podcasts with, breaking news or exciting things that are going to be happening in the very near future. We're very excited to introduce senior HR executive interviews. So over the course of the coming weeks, every week we're going to try to feature a different CHRO interview from the best and brightest minds in human resources nationwide. This Friday we're kicking off with an interview of Dr. Pete Leddy, who was formerly the head of human resources at Life Technology, which was in Vitrogen, just recently sold to Fisher Scientific. Very, very large sale. I think it was $20 billion. Prior to that, he was head of human resources at DoubleTree Hotels. And then prior to that, head of executive development at Dell Worldwide and head of executive development at Pepsi Worldwide. Considered by many to be one of the top 5 CHROs in the country. Truly honored to have him on our podcast this Friday. You don't want to miss it.
Definitely. So, Tom, it looks like businesses will be opening soon. What do you see HR departments doing to prepare for the reopening of the American economy?
It's a great question. Obviously, every day brings more change with this COVID-19. And in the last 4 or 5 days, we have seen dramatic changes yet again. HR leaders across the country are now focusing on, okay, we're going to be reopening. How do we do this? May 1st appears to be kind of a trigger date, plus or minus. And we're seeing CHROs and HR executives across the country now starting to build the plans of how they restart their business. Obviously, the key points there are, number one, what's the date? Number 2, looking to the state government and the federal government for guidelines and suggestions. Sometimes those are congruent, sometimes they're inconsistent, but there's a very, very clear eye to take leadership from the federal and state officials, so they're compliant and they're not creating liabilities for their employers in not following health guidelines. Naturally, there's a lot of communication to get coordinated on the phase-in approach, which appears to be the predominant model right now rather than the flick of the switch. And then finally, companies are now starting to communicate not just internally with their staffs, their departments, and getting everybody integrated and coordinated, but also externally with their customers, so they know that business is going to start back up and what they can expect from a service delivery model and a production perspective. So these are very, very busy times. As one CHRO said to me, Tom, in my 22 years, I've never worked this hard. Just the amount of activity, the amount of coordination, and most importantly, the compliance side of this. Nobody wants to bring people back, create risk, and have a breakout on a micro level, which could create tremendous repercussions in the marketplace, in addition to liability for that company.
Mm-hmm. And what are you hearing from HR and business leaders to be the intermediate or long-term changes on how work gets done because of COVID-19?
I think this is the evolving chapter. And if there's a chapter that's now being, starting to be written, this is it. I spend 5 hours a day, every day on the phone with HR executives across the United States. And everybody has been so appropriately focused on what's immediately in front of them. But they're now starting to say, okay, let's look past the horizon. First, how do we reopen? And there's an intermediate implication of that, which is what's the 1-month, 3-month, 9-month, 12-month plan? Obviously, factoring in that is the understanding that there's over 72 therapeutic treatments and or vaccines in varying stages of trials and testing. And so until a proven or a set of proven therapies and vaccines come out, HR leaders are going to be very conservative in the social and high-touch interactions from employee to employee, employee to customer, or customers to customers. And so we're clearly seeing for the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, there's going to be a cautious optimism. And if I had to put a word on it, it's conservative. It's we need to physically space. We need to take preventative sterilization measures, masks, gloves, etc. So that way we're doing everything possible to protect our people and our customers. Long term, it's really going to come down to vaccines and therapeutic treatments. Several CHROs that I speak with on a fairly frequent basis are all pointing to the great hope that in the next 12 to 18 months that any one of a number of the current trials are going to prove successful, and certainly the initial data is very positive. Once that happens, I think you're going to see America kind of get back to normal, if you will, but I'd offer it with an asterisk. This model has forced companies to do things that they're not always comfortable doing. There's a lot of companies that don't like remote work. There's a lot of companies that don't trust the technology. There's a lot of companies that are high touch, want people in the offices. And they now are forced to realize, hey, we can work remotely. We can learn remotely. We can do business remotely. And oh, by the way, that could be a real competitive advantage in the marketplace when we go to recruit. So now that we've been forced to do it, we saw that it worked, and the technology on a macro basis supported it. Guess what? We're going to continue to explore that. It could save us money. It could lead to greater retention. It could lead to greater productivity, et cetera. And then finally, and this is probably the most important thing that I've heard in the last 2 or 3 days, people are saying, hey, anytime you go through it for the first time, what did we learn and how do we get stronger? So do we have a pandemic plan for the next time something like this happens? And how do we put mechanisms in place and learnings today? And we come up with a simple playbook. So in the event this ever happens in the future, we don't have to try to remember what worked, what didn't work, and how we brought it about. As one of my HR partners said, it's like going through the hurricane for the first time. Better to develop a disaster plan so next time you know how to handle it.
And finally, what unique products and services is TCG providing to support in this reopening?
Yeah, so again, our phone has been ringing, and we've been very, very busy with interim HR leaders and freelance consultants and project managers. We have several hundred, close to almost 1,000 interim HR leaders and freelance consultants in every job family at every level, from manager up to executive vice president. And clients are calling and they need more help. They need help in the areas of communication, integration, coordination, technology, physical process. In other words, bringing people back to work. Also looking at other health measures in terms of additional sanitation requirements and health guidelines. So there's a whole epidemiology piece. And so clients are calling up saying, hey, listen, I could use somebody for 60, 90, 120 days to help me with my restart. And I need them really strong in medical. I need them strong in alignment and culture. I need them strong in staffing, communications, et cetera. So we are deploying human resources and human capital across the country to clients to help them as they start to assimilate and start the engine back up. Many HR departments have been overtaxed to begin with. Some have even had to furlough, so they're very short on staff and they need the help. So whether it's a manager, a director, or a vice president, we've got people ready now and can be deployed in as short as 5 business days.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for being here today, and thank you to everyone for tuning in to today's podcast. We look forward to continuing to provide important HR news during this pandemic.
And remember, next Friday, Dr. Pete Leddy will be our featured CHRO guest, talking about very exciting trends in the HR marketplace. Everybody be safe and God bless.